welcome to another exciting episode of AI with Sohini. And today we have a very special guest. I am in conversation with the industry lead, Chad, who has been the industry lead for generative AI UI UX design. He does some fabulous work with his fabulous team. So today we're going to be having conversations with Chad so that we understand generative AI is not just something that data scientists do. It's not that at all. It is, whenever you're bringing it to an enterprise solution, there are a lot of different kinds of skill sets that are involved. So if anybody has this, has this mental block that, oh, generative AI, it's only for data scientists, that's absolutely not true. And that's the barrier what we want to break today. So Chad, please introduce yourself and thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
All right. Thanks, Suhini, for the kind words. Happy to be here. Happy to join you in this special episode. I'm Chad Macandog, and I'm the Director of Experience in one of the big consulting firms there is, which runs, the range of experience services starting from strategy, service design, interaction design, visual design, you name it, we have it, including research, user research as well, right? I'm passionate about innovation, about creating value and impact from great user experiences inspired by the latest and greatest in technology. And the one that we're going to be talking today is my favorite topic, generative AI.
So let's get started today. So the first topic that we are going to be talking about is, again, in this channel, we've learned a lot about what generative AI is. I think from the data science person's hat. But you, as a UX expert, what is your take of generative AI? How has your learning evolved over time, especially since all of the buzz started in 2023?
Well, I think it's still nascent, to be honest, but it's evolving super fast. It's very hard to catch up with all the developments that's happening around. But if you take a step back and think about, the major tech revolutions that have impacted society and culture throughout our history, right? It's really about making life for humanity simpler and more convenient.
Mm-hmm.
I have a simple formula for this.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to minimize pain and suffering and maximize convenience and pleasure for people,
Mm-hmm.
right? The odd is, your stuff can revolutionize, you know. And this can happen in spurts or incrementally, but every once in a while there are discoveries or inventions, right, that do it at the scale by which it feels inevitable
Mm-hmm.
for humanity, for us to use it in order to progress forward, right? Think about electricity, think about the PC, the internet, right? World shaping technologies. And now we are undergoing another one of these big turns, I'd say, where it's AI, it's Gen AI that's driving the revolution in user experiences.
So tell me, Chad, how do you keep up with everything that is new with generative AI? Because everything may not relate or may not grab your attention, right? Because sometimes there is this ethical dilemmas. Sometimes it is, the model's perplexities are not at par. This is something data scientists worry about. But how do you keep up at it? Which parts of it resonate the most to an expert like you?
Well, it's important to be open-minded and have a learner mindset, right? It's really having the humility to recognize that there's a lot to learn out there and trying to really keep up, and then having, some level of curation in terms of like what's fluff vis-a-vis like providing real value as well. I mean, there's a lot of interesting solutions. ChatGPT is one, right? The one, Bing's Copilot is another one. Google's also evolving theirs. And with Gemini Pro, it's going to become really interesting in that space as well, right?
Absolutely.
I'd say AI right now is in an overhype cycle. So, right? But unlike other technologies which had their hype cycles, I'd say this doesn't seem to be a head fake at all,
Yeah,
right? It's diffusing massively and quickly because everybody sees the value. However, I want to say most Gen AI solutions today are engineering led, right? But it always needs to start there in a way, right? Because right now we don't know what insanely great experiences may look like,
Agreed.
but they will come, right? And at some point, if you believe on this thesis, Suhini, that these foundation models will get commoditized at some
Mhm.
point,
Mhm.
it's worth asking the question, when that happens, how will your solution stand out in the marketplace? I
Agreed.
think there are two things, really. One is data,
Mhm.
proprietary data, right? That will be an edge.
Mhm.
And the second, which I'm passionate about, is inexperience, right? It's
One.
like when Apple starts to introduce something into an existing market category, right? It's always well designed, it's always well integrated, it's always seamless, right? So the experience design, in a way, pushes the technology,
Mhm.
and the technology drives the experience, is how I think about it.
So now tell me, but when you are thinking about the next enterprise product or for the next generative AI product, what is the thought process? What is the checkbox? Do you have like a checklist that, yeah, this, I think we should consider this, or we should not consider this? Is there like a checklist that you formed whenever it comes to a, let's say, an enterprise solution? But whenever you're looking at enterprise, it's a completely different beast.
Well, in the consumer space, as you mentioned, things like ChatGPT is already shifting user behavior away from search, for example, right? Which is a huge thing. If you remember what they said earlier about making life for humans simpler and more convenient as being key, in this case, these Gen AI solutions are 10xing the simplicity and convenience of obtaining knowledge, right?
Mhm.
As compared to how we were doing it before, where it's about seeing links off a search results page,
Mhm.
right? Clicking them,
Mhm.
synthesizing content from many different sources.
Mhm.
And us as enterprise practitioners are also consumers as well. So that begins to develop our mindsets, expectations, and habits as well. That's going to trickle down to the enterprise space. But in the enterprise space, it's a little bit different,
Mhm.
right? Because unlocking the power of Gen AI in the enterprise space, I'd say carries a lot of responsibility,
Mhm.
right? But there's a race to crack it for
Mhm.
competitive advantage, right? Because any enterprise that can enable their employees with generative AI
Mhm.
will have a competitive edge automatically,
Right.
because it will unlock a lot of productivity and creativity, right? In the workforce. And it's a big thing.
Agree, 100%. So it's always progress over perfection. That's what you're saying. So it's important.
It's always about progress over perfection, right? There's no perfect. There's only progress.
100%. And it could be that we reached our version of perfection, and by that time, Gemini is there right now. So we're like, okay, now what do we do?
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
have you seen Sora? Like, the amount of progress in this space is really staggering. And it's
Absolutely.
hard to keep up, but it's exciting at the same time.
So, Chad, most of the viewers in this channel, they are trying to have a job change or an industry change. What kind of skill sets or what mindset would you like them to make sure they have so that they can be successful in a domain such as UI UX research, but focused more on the generative AI?
Curiosity is the primary thing.
Got it.
Always need to be curious, always need to be open for learning.
Mm-hmm.
Having, deep interest in observing people, learning their ways,
Mm-hmm.
how they use technology, right? What outcomes they drive as
Mm-hmm.
well, and what it means for the business they're managing,
Mm-hmm.
for example, right? Because, in the experience design space, it's really about, knowing your users, right? The people that's using your product, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that their behaviors are being served seamlessly and really intuitively in their user experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's really number one, right? And also, I'd say have a some a deep interest as well in learning the technology too,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not just about learning people, you also need to learn the technology. You need to spend effort in learning the technology because you're going to be working with technologists, right? You can't design an experience in a vacuum, right? You need to ground the experience into what's feasible,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that you can, you know, define an experience that works, that
Yeah.
can be deployed to production. It's
Makes
not going to be a vaporware,
makes sense. Makes sense.
right?
Makes
And
sense.
also, thirdly is, business savviness, I'd say. Um, you know, um, so people is one, technology is another, and then not last, but a really important thing is also learning how, what we do drives business value as well. So you need all those three. You always need to triangulate across those three going forward for experienced practitioners.
So, tell me a little bit about this UX research aspect. You touched on it. I just wanted to unfold that a little bit more because I think your job is harder than the data scientist's job. And the reason for that is we can build a back end and we can make sure that the response comes up. But then you have the onus is on you to say, okay, maybe it's the same response. Comes. So if I asked a question, a dog just bit me, what should I do? So there can be three different responses, and to each and every one of them, some could be thumbs ups and some could be thumbs down. So now, what is the rationale that you put in order to say, okay, this is a better quality response versus that is not? So then that is the information that is used to again fine tune. So the feedback loop of it. I think that's something that most people leave out of the equation. And that's how you know a prototype versus an enterprise solution because you need to have that feedback. And your expertise is super critical in that feedback aspect of it. So, can you help us unpack how do you go about, figuring out that if there are three very different responses, which one should I take, which one should I leave, or that decision making process?
Yeah, and this is really about, having you have to know your users, right?
Mm-hmm.
What outcomes are they driving,
Mm-hmm.
right? What decisions are they making?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what questions are they going to ask,
Mm-hmm.
which would relate to the outcomes that they're driving and the decisions that they're making as well, right? And then you ask what type of responses will be most effective. So if you're a COO, you're pretty senior
Mm-hmm.
in the enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So executives will typically want a brief, concise, and direct response,
Mm-hmm.
right? While analysts, for example, will probably want all the details up front. So
Mm-hmm.
that's important. So knowing your users,
Personas. Yeah.
personas exactly, and what types of responses will will be fit
Mm-hmm. Making
for
sense.
them, right? And then how will they take action on those responses? Are they gonna share it and assign it to people?
Mm-hmm.
Then those people figure it out. Will they be the ones shaping the strategy for course correction and then share it with everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Will they make the team execute better?
Mm-hmm.
Discuss it in a meeting, right? And what are their expectations as well?
Mm-hmm.
And once you know all these things, right, you can then establish principles, right? So, what is the voice and the tone of the Gen AI solution,
Mhm, mhm,
right? Is it proactive or
mhm,
is it reactive, right? Is it always on? Is it always visible, for example, right? What are the acceptable thresholds in terms of quality, for
mhm,
example? Should it always be 100% accurate or is there an acceptable, tolerable margin? Say,
mhm,
for example, do we show a low confidence response,
mhm,
right? Or do we only show medium confidence response and high confidence responses, right? How do we handle edge cases, for example, right? Questions that Gen AI isn't trained to answer yet, etc., or completely out of scope questions, etc.,
mhm.
or questions that perhaps a user doesn't have access to the answer,
Yeah.
right? To the data, for example, right? And how do you collect feedback? How do you drive the feedback loop? And how do you afford, mechanisms through which users can actually, to your point, thumbs up or thumbs down responses that they see, or actually give a more um, detailed feedback
Yeah.
into this stuff.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What it's really while I'm talking to you, I'm coming up with ideas right now. I think the idea here is just think of it. If there were this black box, again, just like generative AI, that you can enable on top of ChatGPT 4 or any other large language model, the goal that would do is the automated persona generation. Because I think just as you articulated it, the major difference is the number of sub questions that that persona unpacks. Like an
Right.
analyst might want everything. But if it's a larger, it's a higher level C-suite, then they might be unpacking a lot of information, but they want just a summary of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, if you had this, your UI UX team could just have this one black box. We just connect that black box with the large language model. And this tells you that if there's one question, maybe that means there are five underlying questions that you need to unpack in order to give a reasonable response to the user rather than just answering the question as is. And I think that is exactly where enterprise level generative AI is going. You're right, because it's not the same user experience for everyone. That is the key point that you're touching on, right? Because
Absolutely. And that's how, or that's when it becomes an experience,
mm,
right? Moving from transactional, kind of like I ask you a question, I get a response, I ask another
mm,
question, I get another response,
mm,
etc., into an experience that is a little bit more contextual, conversational,
mm,
right? And guided
mm.
in a way.
Makes sense.
Because really, a pure engineering driven approach here, Suhini, would be to intake all the questions people might ask about
Mhm.
something, right?
Yeah.
Like financial performance, for
Mhm.
example, right? And it can be ready to answer it every time, right? It will provide a lot of value for sure. However, and we know this, oftentimes people don't even know the right questions to ask,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or where to start.
Yeah.
Or worse, they might ask the wrong questions that could lead them away from where they truly need to look, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Making them zoomed in to the wrong things versus the right things where their focus needs to be, right?
100%.
Which can be costly if it happens late,
Mhm.
right? And
Agree.
this is where experience design comes, is what you were mentioning, because understanding the outcomes people are aiming to drive and the different drivers that impact those outcomes and the different lenses through which they look at those from, that's going to shape the questions they will ask going forward, right? And understanding how these questions relate to one another as well, and the sequence through which those questions should happen. And also understanding the different roles and the components that people are accountable in driving as well. Because while the CEO of an enterprise cares about profit or profitability in general, right? Finance will care about collections,
Something else. Everybody
operations will
has.
care about cost, etc. So different parts of what makes up the whole profitability area, different people care about different things. And this is where the power of decision flows
Yeah.
come.
Agreed. Agreed.
So he, right? Because there's a common framework for this, and we've been talking about this. Like, it's a really simple framework. Where are we? What happened? Why are we here? Where are we headed? And what
What
can be
can we do?
changed to
Yeah.
course correct,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed.
And once you're able to understand these, it's easier to provide a better experience with Gen AI, right? Because we can give people starter questions, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Based on where AI is seeing patterns that might signal a problem, for example,
Agreed.
right? And then we can also tee up the next best questions as well.
Yeah.
So they can drill down to the problem contextually based on what's driving the problem and also based on their role, right?
Agreed. Agreed.
And, being able to curate responses and frankly, even questions based on who's asking in their roles, right?
Perfect.
And you cannot enable this experience without something like an ontology, for example, or a knowledge graph of some sort, right? Which maps the relationships of outcomes and drivers, and that's going to be key to decision flows. Experience will not take ownership of something like that, but experience, by virtue of thinking of ways we can really radically simplify things for people, will collaborate with, you and technologists, data
Mhm.
scientists in order to establish something like that.
So UI UX operationalizes. That's amazing. So as a last, I won't take any more time of from you, Chad. As a last question I wanted to leave people at is, can you give us some ways in which you keep connected with the generative AI updates? Is there any blogs, any particular medium, or how do you stay connected? What are some places where that you use a lot in order to stay apprised with what's happening in the community?
Well, I have two main sources of info.
Okay.
The first one is LinkedIn,
Okay.
following all the right people,
Mm-hmm.
right? All the leading players in the space, I'd say, right? And also shamelessly Twitter
Okay. All right.
as well. Um, you
Okay.
know, you know, surprisingly, oftentimes things get announced in Twitter first, and it trickles
Mm-hmm.
down.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Chad. It was amazing and enlightening. I will be adding a few links in the description box below with regards to the sources that Chad talked about, and we will keep the ball rolling so that you understand that enterprise AI or enterprise solutions is not just for data science practitioners. It has very key players such as UI UX leads, just as what Chad mentioned. So thank you very much and see you next time.